Welcome to Planning for Protection.
Welcome to Planning for Protection with attorney Jeff Ryder. Jeff is an elder law and estate planning attorney serving families and aging adults across Carroll County and the surrounding Indiana communities. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today we're talking about what every Indiana family should know about elder law and Medicaid planning. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Leanne.
Jeff, to start with, could you share a little bit about your background and what led you to focus your practice on elder law and planning for families in Indiana?
I would be glad to do that. I am 64 years old, and I moved to Delphi, my small town, when I was 2 years old, and lived there all my life. Went to high school, grade school, middle school, and off to college, and off to law school, and came back to my hometown to practice. And when I got here, I had three older partners, and they gave me a brochure and said, Jeff, there's something about this Medicaid stuff down in Indianapolis. Why don't you go to this seminar and find out about it? We don't really know anything about it, and we don't want to know anything about it, but why don't you find out about it? Off I went, and Indianapolis is about an hour and a half south of here. And I remember sitting through that first seminar, and it was like drinking from a fire hose. There was so much information and so many rules and details. My head was swimming, but it was intriguing. And so I went back to that seminar. It held in the spring for about 4 or 5 times. And gradually, it all began to make sense. And it became a logical thing once you knew the rules. And so I began to practice. And one of my first clients was my aunt. And boy, if I had known then what I know now, I would have done it a lot differently. But we did it, and we got her assets protected, and she was able to age at home with the help and care of her children. And so it all worked out very well. But it was a real learning curve. And I remember my first big break, so to speak. One of my attorney friends in Delphi, who was a much older attorney, said, Jeff, my farmer friend who I go visit in the nursing home every week was denied for Medicaid eligibility. Could you look at that? And I said, well, okay. So I looked at it, and it turned out that the attorney that had assisted them had utilized the wrong snapshot date. Mm-hmm. And the snapshot date is the first period of continuous institutionalization for a continuous period of 30 days or more. And this gentleman had a snapshot date, probably 3 or 4 or 5 years earlier. And then since then, he'd been in the nursing home, and they'd spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so it made a big difference as to which date you use, because when the snapshot date occurred, they had a lot more liquid assets, which were countable, than when they had applied. And so they'd already spent down enough money to qualify. But he had not realized that earlier snapshot date. And so they had denied his application. And luckily, we were still within the appeal period, and I was able to appeal the decision. And we got a reversal of the refusal to approve him for Medicaid, which made him Medicaid eligible for probably 6 months or more back. And that had then impressed the nursing home administrator so much. He was like, wow, I had to refund, $50,000 or $75,000 to this family for their care. This was 20 years ago or more. And so he started recommending me to everybody, and my practice basically exploded at that point, and I never looked back.
Well, I love your passion, and obviously you've helped people in many, many ways over the years. But now to get into today's topic, first of all, what does elder law actually cover for families in Indiana?
Good question. The way I would answer that question is, I think there's several components of it. One is what we call crisis Medicaid planning. Your loved one has been admitted to the hospital and is headed to the nursing home or is already in the nursing home. And you suddenly realize, golly, we're going to have to pay $10, $11, $12,000 a month for this. Is there anything we can do, or what can we do? And that is a big part of our practice, crisis planning. And there's two distinct categories of people. There are people without a spouse and people who have a community spouse. If you have a community spouse, then you can do a lot more planning to shift the ownership of assets to your spouse and qualify for Medicaid much easier with eligibility by shifting those assets. Another big area of elder law is just general estate planning, because you need to be thinking about a will or a trust to make sure your wishes are honored when you pass away. You also need to be thinking about a power of attorney that will put someone in place to be able to help you make the daily activities that you need to do, paying bills, talking with the doctor, the nursing staff, the lab, all those aspects of healthcare and financial aspects that it would be nice to have a trusted person in your life to be able to assist you with those. And you say, but I'm fine right now. Well, sure you are right now, but what about 10, 15, 20 years from now? Will that always be the case? Maybe not. So why don't you get the planning in place to enable the people that you trust and are comfortable with to be able to help you to do that? Another big area of elder law planning is asset protection planning. I have many clients who have been basically working all their lives very hard, and many of them have been pretty frugal. They have saved, they have pinched pennies, they have done without, they've led pretty virtuous lives. They haven't had any drug problems or alcohol problems or gambling problems. So they've managed to accumulate some assets. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that if they do no planning at all, most of those assets will be at risk potentially for cost of long-term care. But in Indiana, there is a 5-year look-back period. If you take steps to shift the ownership of assets, for instance, to a family asset protection trust, you can, and you do that at least 5 years before you would need to apply for Medicaid, you can protect your farm, your house, your vehicles, your bank accounts, your stock brokerage accounts. And many people find it attractive to be able to do that.
Wow, it sounds like it's really important to plan ahead. What tends to happen when people wait too long to start that process?
Well, as I mentioned, there is this 5-year look back period, and so that is kind of the magic date. And people come in, they're maybe in their mid 70s, and they say, Jeff, we're thinking possibly about what might happen in the future. And so I describe, the opportunity to do these asset protection trusts. And sometimes they're like, but I have to give up some control of the assets. And I don't have a child that I really trust implicitly to do the right thing by me if they are the trustee of that trust. And so they say, well, thanks for the information, Jeff, but I'm just going to take my chances. And sometimes that works out. They die peacefully in their bed when they're 94 years old with never darkening the door of a nursing home. And there was no penalty or no detriment associated with failing to plan for that. But sometimes, that doesn't work out and they end up having a stroke or a heart attack or something that causes them to need long-term care, or dementia is a big one. And so there's just a lot of comfort that people can realize by knowing that they have taken steps to at least start the 5-year period of protection, and know that they've done everything they can to try to plan for the future and make sure that assets are as protected as they can be for their family.
There seems to be a lot of confusion around the idea that Medicaid will take care of everything. What are some of the misunderstandings you often see when families are trying to protect their savings or their home?
Oh, golly. That is a very good question. I get uh, a lot of questions, and a lot of people really have little idea of how Medicaid works. And so some people say, well, I know Medicaid will take everything if I have to go on Medicaid. That's not exactly true. Medicaid itself doesn't take anything, just like the nursing home itself doesn't take anything. But the way it actually works is if you want to get help from Medicaid to pay your bill, they require that you spend down your assets. And there's ways you can do that that are more attractive than writing checks to the nursing home. And so, what a common misconception sometimes people say, well, the nursing home told me I have to sell my house and spend down all my money. Well, the first thing is not true. You don't have to sell your house. In Indiana, you can convert your house to become an income producing piece of real estate by renting it out. Same
Uh-huh.
thing with your farm, same thing if you have commercial buildings. The fact that they are income producing, would mean that they have they can be made exempt for application purposes. And so you don't have to sell your house, you don't have to sell your farm or your buildings to qualify for Medicaid. There is the potential risk of a state recovery, though, at the end. So we would have to come back and talk about how to minimize that risk. But
Mhm.
for, at least for application purposes, you don't have to sell your stuff. And I also get people who talk about, well, I heard this at the beauty shop or the barber shop or the uh, grocery store or whatever. And in many cases, what I want to stress is every family is unique and there is a lot of similarities, but there are differences. And every family's got different dynamics, every family's got different assets, every family's got different such situations and circumstances. And sometimes people come in and say, well, Joe Smith told me that, blah, 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 blah. Well, my answer is, well, your situation and Joe Smith's situation are quite different. And there's options that we can do with you that we couldn't do with Joe and vice versa. So don't listen to the beauty shop chatter or the barbershop chatter. You need to get the answers. And I feel like I can give you those answers.
Yeah, for sure. Is there a story or example that comes to mind, without sharing details, of course, that shows how early planning helped a family avoid unnecessary stress and unexpected costs?
Um, I can think of several stories,
Mhm.
and typically they involve people who have taken action to create protection for their assets. And I've got a lot of farmer clients, and they have uh, taken taken steps to protect their farmland. And generally speaking, the family is so grateful and thankful when they pass away, and we do not have to worry about a claim by Medicaid for a state recovery against the value of that farm or that house. So yes, I can think of a lot of situations where people have taken action and been very happy that they did. Conversely, I can think about situations where people haven't taken any action, and it does limit their options. You have less flexibility and less options if you haven't planned. So I encourage everyone to plan.
So, for somebody who's just starting to think about long term care, and I'm kind of curious at what age maybe you want to say people could start considering this, what are some practical steps that make a big difference early on?
Well, as far as age, there is, I don't think, any age that is too early, but I can
Mhm.
tell you, people in their working years, their 30s, 40s, 50s, they're not really thinking about the future that much, and their health is good, and their children are still, maybe young or in their early 20s and not making all the wisest decisions that you hope they might. And so I would say the target people that I often meet with are generally in their 60s or 70s, 80s, even early 90s. They're, they realize that, they're not immortal and they're not going to live forever. And maybe what could the future look like? And that begins them thinking about the journey of what could we do to protect the assets that we've worked so hard for.
And what are some practical steps that make a big difference early on?
Well, the I think having a plan, what does that plan look like? There are some long-term care products that can make a big difference. The question is, can you afford them? And if you've got decent income and you want to move in that direction, that does give you more flexibility in your in the final stages. If you have a long-term care product that will help fund that. And there are traditionally there was pay-as-you-go nursing home policies, but those have pretty well faded out. They've gotten so expensive that people can't afford them. So what is moving in the direction of is asset-based long-term care products, often built on a life insurance chassis. And that life insurance chassis is, if you've got a couple, it can be a second to die life insurance product with a long-term care rider. And the advantage of that is your family is not going to totally lose the value of everything you invested in it. They're going to get it back with interest, not as much maybe as if you invested it, but at least you're going to get it all back if you don't end up needing it. Whereas traditional policies were use it or lose it. And so you have to it's interesting. My mother who's 93 years old, has just started drawing on her long-term care policy, and she did it years ago when they had a product called the Indiana Partnership Policies, which offers 100% asset protection,
Nice.
and she's got a lot of value in this policy, and she resisted using it for years because she didn't need it. But finally she said okay, and they did an assessment, and yeah, they figured she could use some help, and so she still lives independently by herself, but a lady comes in and helps her 3 days a week, and she's loves it. The lady's really nice, they get along great, and she's able to run her to the doctor's office and do errands for her and do cleaning and cooking for her. And so and we're like, Mom, why don't you? All this money is going to go poof when you die if you don't use it. At least start using some of it and get the benefit of it and have a higher quality of life. So it's not it's something to totally reject. There are these policies, but if you don't decide to use those policies, there's a lot of other strategies that you can use to protect, the house, the farm, the money. So it's a both and. I think consider all your options and consider what makes the most sense for your particular family and your particular situation.
Wow, I really appreciate that story about your mom, and I know, from many people that it's such a blessing to them. They resist and they resist, but when they get that care, they're so happy with it after they
Exactly.
actually take the step. But we're about wrapped up for our first episode, and there's so much more we look forward to digging into in future episodes. So, one last question before we go. Medicaid rules, tax considerations, family dynamics, they all interact in these cases. You get to be a master conductor of all of that. When you sit down with a new client, what is the one thing you look for, the first thing that you look at to make sure that their planning lines up with both their needs and Indiana's rules?
What you just said resonated with me
Mm.
because there are a lot of factors that impact these discussions and decisions. And I enjoy it because it's not boring and it's not everything's the same. Everything is different and there's always something new coming down the horizon. And I enjoy keeping up with all that and being able to integrate the tax considerations and the estate planning considerations and the asset protection planning considerations. It's just a very and I of course deal a lot with real estate because of that's what a lot of my clients have, and it's just a very stimulating and rewarding field to be involved in, and it keeps me thinking, it keeps me sharp, and enjoy it very much. And the other thing is, people really appreciate it. I can tell you, the overwhelming feeling when people walk out of here is gratitude, thankfulness that they know their options, they know what is possible, they know they have a plan forward of what they can do to achieve their goals, and it's a very rewarding field to practice in because people are so appreciative of the information that you can provide.
Well, Jeffrey, I can just feel your knowledge and care just coming right through the line, so to speak. And that's it for today's episode of Planning for Protection. If you'd like to learn more about attorney Jeffrey Ryder and his work at Jeffrey C. Ryder, Attorney at Law, LLC, visit jryderlaw.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to the show, and share this episode with someone who might find it helpful. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.